Lesson 16. The issue of predestination and free will. One of the issues which is directly related to the issue of the justice of the Creator is the question of predestination or free will. According to those who believe in predestination, a human being has no choice whatever in his or her acts, behavior, or words, and the movements of his organs are just like the predestined movements of tile parts of a machine. Thus, this question arises: how does this opinion relate to divine justice? And perhaps, because of this, the group of the Ashurites, the group we previously mentioned who deny intellectual good and evil, have accepted predestination and deny justice. Why? Because when one accepts predestination, justice makes no sense. In order to further clarify this point, we are obliged to study several subjects with care. Number 1. The root of the belief in predestination. All people within their being sense that they are free to make decisions, for example, whether or not to give a loan to such and such a friend, or that one drinks a glass of water placed before one. If one so desires or does not drink it, or if another person commits an error in relation to this person, this second person can forgive or not forgive the error, or that everyone distinguishes a hand which shakes because of illness or old age from a hand which one purposefully causes to shake. In spite of the fact that the issue of free will is a general human sense, why do some people follow the school of the Fatalists? Of course, there are several important reasons which we shall recall here, and they are that a human being sees that an environment has an effect upon another person, education is another, propaganda and social culture also, without doubt, affect the thoughts and spirit of a person. Sometimes even one's economic position can provide a motive for movement in a human being, and one cannot deny a factor. The totality of these cause one to assume that a person does not have free will, but rather that the external and internal factors join hands and force us to make a decision, and that if these factors did not exist, we would not be faced with these problems. These are things which can be called the environmental determinants, economic determinants, educational determinants, and predestination are among the factors considered to be important by the school of fatalists. Number 2. The main error of the fatalists. But those who think this way have forgotten an important point, and it is that the discussion is not about motives and defective causes. The discussion is about complete causes. In other words, no one can deny the role played by the environment, culture, and economics in the thoughts and acts of a human being. The discussion is that with all of these motives, the final decision still remains with us, because we clearly sense that even in an erroneous system, one which rebels against God's commands, like the monarchical system of the past, which had laid the groundwork for deviation, we were not obliged to deviate and to go to the centers of corruption. Thus, one must distinguish between and separate our bases and complete causes. Because of this, a great many people who live in a comfort or have been nurtured in a deviated culture, or they inherited unsuitability, at any rate have separated their way from that of others, and have either arisen or revolted against that environment. If every human being was supposed to be the child of his or her environment, culture, and propagation of the times, no real or basic revolution would have ever taken place in the world. Everyone would have to adapt to his or her environment and never build a new one. All of these show that the above-mentioned factors do not make one's destiny. They are only basis. One's principles or main fate is determined by one's own willpower. This is exactly as if we were to decide on a very hot summer day to fast according to God's commands. All of our body needs water, while it is possible that in order to obey God, we ignore all of this, whereas it is possible others follow this request and not fast. Thus, All motives which cause one's destiny exist. Number 3. The social and political factors of the school of fatalism. The truth is that the issue of predestination and free will throughout history has been misused. A series of predestined factors have increased the belief in fatalism and the denial of free will of the human being among them. A. Political factors. Many of the despotic and selfish politicians, in order to extinguish the fire of revolution among the deprived, in order to assure the continuation of their illegal rule, for every rule or regime which oppresses the people and denies people their rights is illegal from the point of view of Islam. Convince the people through all the means available to them that they have no free will, that predestination and predetermination of history holds our destiny in its hands. If one group rules and another is ruled, this is a rule of fate and history and destiny of history. It is clear how this kind of thinking can narcotize people and aids the policies of colonialism, whereas according to our intellect and our divine law, our destiny and fate lies in our own hands, and fate and destiny in the sense of predestination and predetermination does not exist. Divine fate and destiny is determined through our movements, desires, willpower, faith, efforts, and endeavors we make. B. Psychological factors, laziness and indifference. Lazy, indifferent, and lethargic individuals exist who most often meet up with defeat in life, and they never desire to admit this bitter truth that their laziness or errors have caused their defeat. Thus, in order to avoid confronting themselves with the deficiencies and developing themselves into better people, they turn into fatalism, and they think that their sin is a result of coercive fate, so that in this way they can find a false sense of security. They say, "What can be done? We were blackened from the beginning. It will not be whitened even with the water of Zamzam or Kauthar. We are extremely talented and make great efforts, but unfortunately we have no luck." C. Social factors. Some people want to be free, to be able to follow their carnal desires, and every sin which is to their liking they want to commit, and at the same time somehow convince themselves that they are not sinners and deceive society that they are sinless. It is here that they turn to fatalism and their carnal desires with the justification that we have no free will to choose not to do these things. But they well know that all of these are lies, and even those who make such claims and raise such issues know that they are baseless, but their pleasures and passing fantasies do not allow them to admit this truth. Thus, in order to build a healthy society, we must struggle against this fatalist way of thinking, belief in one's coercive destiny, which are tools used in the hands of colonialism and exploitation, and an instrument to deceitfully justify defeat, and the factor which causes corruption to progress in a society. Think and answer. Number 1. What is the difference between the schools of fatalism and free will? Number 2. What causes one to choose fatalism? Number 3. What answer can you give to the effects of environment, culture, and heritage? Number 4. What are the political, psychological, and social factors which cause an extension in the beliefs of fatalism? Number 5. What position should we take when confronted by these factors? Lesson 17. The clearest reason for free will. Number 1. The general conscience of human beings denies predestination. Even if philosophers and divine scholars give different reasons for free will of human being, here we will take a shortcut and give the clearest reason given by the supporters of free will, and this is the universal or collective conscience of human beings. This is, no matter what we deny, we cannot deny this reality that in all human societies, including both the worshippers of God and the materialists, East and West, ancient and modern, wealthy and poor, developed or undeveloped, or whatever culture, all without exception, agree that a law should rule human beings and that human beings are responsible before the law, and people who disobey the law must be punished. In other words, the rule of law, the responsibility of individuals before it, and the punishment of those who disobey the law are things which all intelligent people agree with, and it was only savage, primitive tribes who did not officially recognize these three things. The fact that we explain this as the general conscience of human beings of the world is the clearest proof of the existence of free will in human beings and the fact that they have free choice. How can it be accepted that a human being be obliged in his or her actions and that he or she have no freedom of choice, but he or she is responsible before the law? And that when a law is broken, that person must be tried and asked why he or she did this or that, or did not do this or that, and if proven guilty, that person is sent to prison or even, depending upon the crime, executed. This is exactly as if we were to punish stones which slide down a mountain, causing a landslide on a mountain road, which results in the death of one or more human beings. It is true that a human being differs from a stone, but if we deny free will and choice in a human being, this external difference between them will not be relevant and both will be the victims of fate. A stone following the law of gravity falls upon the roadside, and a human being who murders another is the victim of another factor of fate. Thus, the logic of those who believe in predestination allows for no distinction to be made between a stone and a human being from the point of view of result, and neither acted according to their own free will. Why should one be tried and not the other? We are at a crossroad. We either have to deny existence of the common conscience of all the people of the world and consider the court's punishment of those who disobey the law to be ridiculous and useless and even oppressive, or deny the beliefs of the fatalists. Obviously, the latter is preferable. It is interesting to note that those who believe in the school of fatalism and give reasons for their belief, when they are faced with real-life situations, they act according to free will. For instance, if a person aggresses against them or annoys or bothers them, they take this person to court and do not rest at ease until that person is punished. Well, if it is really true that a person has no choice or free will, what are all of this commotion in court and trial about? At any rate, this common conscience of the intelligent of the world is a living idea for the reality that human beings have accepted the existence of free will in the depths of their being and has always been loyal to that and cannot live without the belief for even one day and have the wheels of social and individual programs progress. A great Iranian philosopher, Khwaja Nair al-Din Tusi, in discussing predestination and free will, says in one short sentence in his book, Kitab Tajruba bi al-Aqaid, our necessary understanding and conscience tells us that we are responsible for all of our deeds. Number 2. The contradiction between the logic of predestination and free will. That which we have said above was about the contradiction between the school of predestination and the common conscience of the intelligence of the world, both from the point of view of supporters of religion and people who do not at all accept religion. But from the point of view of religious thought, there is another sure reason for recognizing the falsity of the school of fatalism. As religious belief can never agree with fatalism, religious programs as well are all altered by accepting the school of thought. How can we reconcile the justice of God, which we proved in previous lessons, with the school of fatalism? How is it possible that God obliged someone to do an evil deed, then punish him because he did it? This does not agree with any kind of logic. Thus, By accepting the school of fatalism, spiritual rewards, punishments, heaven and hell are meaningless, as well as scroll of deeds, questioning divine reckoning, reprimanding the evildoers in the Quran, encouragement and praise for those who do good. All of these lose their meaning because according to this school, neither do the good doers or the evil doers have a choice. In addition, in religion, one of the first issues we encounter is duty or responsibility. But does duty or responsibility make any sense if a person has no choice? Can we tell a person whose hands involuntarily shake not to shake their hands, or tell a person who is falling down a steep mountain to stand still? It is because of this that Imam Ali, peace be upon him, says in a famous tradition recorded in the Usul al-Kafi, Volume 1, that the school of fatalism is a school of idol worship. Those followers are members of Iblis party. These words of idol worshipping brothers, enemies of God, members of Iblis party. Think and answer. What is the clearest reason of the falsity of fatalism? Number 2. Describe the general or common conscience people of the world which believes in the principle of free will. Number 3. Do the followers of the school of fatalism according to their beliefs? Number 4. Does fatalism agree with the principle of divine justice? If not, why? Number 5. Why is free will the basis for accepting any kind duty or responsibility? Lesson 18. A world of wonder in a small word. What is the middle way? Number 1. Conferring is opposed to fatalism. Of course, opposing the belief in fatalism, which is one kind of an extreme, is the school of conferring, which is at the other extreme. Those who accept this school believe that God created us and then put everything at our disposal, and that in general, He is not responsible for anything that we do, and in this way we are completely independent in choosing what we do. Doubtlessly, this belief does not agree with monotheism because monotheism has taught us that God rules the entire world and nothing is beyond His control. Even our free will and free choice cannot be beyond His realm, otherwise polytheism would of necessity result. In other words, we cannot believe in two gods, one the great creator of the universe and the other a small one who is the human being who is free to do whatever he or she wishes, completely free and independent, and even God cannot affect what he or she wishes to do. This is duality in polytheism. What is important is that we know human beings have freedom of choice and free will at the same time that we know God to be the ruler over all persons and deeds. Number 2. The school of the middle way. The fine point to recognize is here that we not imagine that there is a contradiction between the two. The fact is that we both accept God's justice as well as the freedom and responsibility of His servants, and as well as unity and His rule over the entire universe of existence. And this is that very thing which is known as the middle way, something which is in between two extremes. Let us clarify this with an example, as the issue is a very complicated one. Let us assume that you are traveling on an electric train and you are the driver of the train. A strong electric cable has been placed along the line of the train and the train is connected with a link to this electric cable and moves, and moment after moment the electricity is passed to the locomotive in such a way that if for just one moment the electricity to the locomotive stops, the whole train will stop. Without doubt, you are free. You can stop wherever you want and you can move at your own speed. But in spite of all of this freedom, the person who is sending the electricity can at any moment make you stop because all of your power and strength is that very electricity and he holds the key. When we note this example with care, we see that even though one has such freedom, choice, and responsibility, one is completely at the disposal of the power of another, and these two do not contradict each other. Another example: assume that the hand muscle of a person is the result of illness or the occurring of an unforeseen event do not work, and he does not have the power to move his hand. But if we connect that to a very small amount of electricity, the nerves will be warmed and become capable of movement. Whenever such a person commits a crime with that hand, for instance, and in that very state strikes another person in their face, strikes a knife in an innocent person, it is clear who the person responsible is, because he both had the power and the choice, and the person who has willpower is responsible for what he does. But at the same time, that person who gives his hand electricity and creates his power and strength rules over him, and while he is free and has a choice, he is in his grasp. Now let us return to the main point. God has given us physical power or strength, and from moment to moment it continues, and if it is cut off for even a moment, and our connection with him be cut off, we would be destroyed. If we can do anything, it is because we have strength which he has given us, and it continues moment by moment, and even our freedom and choice is also from him. That is, he willed that we be free, and making use of this great divine kindness, one can transform oneself. Thus, at the same time that we have free choice and a free will, we are in his grasp, and we will never move beyond his realm. At the same time that we have strength and power, we are dependent upon him, and without him we will be destroyed. And this is what the middle way means, because neither have we recognized any creature to be equal to God, which would bring multitheism, nor do we believe creatures are obliged to act as they do, which would bring oppression. We have learned this lesson from our pure Imams, peace be upon them. Whenever they were asked, does anything exist between fatalism and conferring? They said, yeah, more extensive than the distance between heaven and earth. Usul al-Kafi, Volume 1. Number 3. The Holy Quran and Fatalism and Free Will. The Holy Quran states this issue directly improves the free will of human beings, and there are hundreds of verses which talk about free will. A. All of the verses which relate to commanding to virtue and preventing vice are all proof of the free will of human beings, because if a person was obliged to do so, doing so would make no sense. B. All of the verses which blame and reproach the evildoers and praise the good doers are proof of free will, because if one was obliged to do whatever one did, blame or praise would make no sense. C. All of the verses which talk about questioning on the day of judgment and the judgment in that court, and then the rewards and punishments in heaven and hell are proof of free will, because if one was to assume that everything was predestined, then questioning, judging, rewards, and punishments would all be oppressive. D. All of the verses which say that a human being is responsible for his or her deeds. Every soul will be held in pledge for its deeds, yet in each individual in pledge for his deeds. Verses like, we showed him the way, whether he be grateful or ungrateful, rests on his will, but you will not accept as God wills. Think in answer. Number 1. What is meant by conferring, and whatever is hidden in it? Number 2. Describe in a clear way the middle way which we learned from the Imams, and give examples. Number 3. What does the Holy Quran say about free will and predestination? Number 4. If we accept the idea of fatalism, what happens to spiritual rewards and punishments in heaven and hell? Number 5. Is the verse, but you will not accept as God wills, a proof of fatalism? Is the verse, but you will not accept as God wills. A proof of fatalism? Lesson 19. Guidance and error are in God's hands. Number 1. The parts of guidance and error. A traveler has an address in his hand. He meets you and asks you to help him find the address. You have two choices before you. First, to go with him and complete your good deed by accompanying him to his destination and then say goodbye and leave him. Second, indicate with your hand and giving various signs guide him toward his destination. It is evident that both cases you have guided him toward his destination, but there is a difference between these two. The second one is just expressing way, and the first is taking one to one's destination. The Holy Quran and traditions of Islam mention both ways. On the other hand, sometimes guidance only has legal quality to it, that is, formed by means of laws and rules, and sometimes it has an instinctive quality, that is, by means of facilities provided by creation, like guidance of a seed to becoming a complete human being, and both of these ways are mentioned in the Holy Quran and the traditions. By clarifying the means of guidance and naturally the point opposite it, leading astray or error, we return to the main discussion. We read in many of the verses of the Holy Quran that guidance and leading astray is God's work. Doubtlessly, the indication of the way comes from God. Why? Because He sent the Prophet and sent the heavenly book to show people the way. But reaching the goal through coercion or force clearly does not agree with free will and choice, but because all power and strength which is necessary to reach one's goal, God gives us, and it is He who gives us success upon this way. The sense of guidance is also from God, that is, preparation of the equipment and the preliminaries and providing them is at disposal of humanity. Number 2. An important question. Now, an important question arises, and that is why we read in many verses of the Holy Quran, God guides whom He wills and misleads whom He wills. Some people, without considering other verses of the Holy Quran and the interpretation which one verse has with others, immediately upon seeing this verse, object and say, if God guides whom He wills and misleads whom He wills, what are we supposed to do in the middle? The important point is that the words of the Holy Quran must always be studied in relation to each other in order to understand them in truth. Here, we will recall several other verses about guidance and leading astray so that you can study them in relation to the above verse. God will establish and strengthen those who believe with the word that stands firm in this world and in the hereafter. But God will leave to stray those who do wrong. God does what He wills. Thus God leave to stray such as transgress and leave in doubt. And those who strive in our cause, we will certainly guide them to our paths. For verily God is with those who do right. As we see, God's will is not unaccountable. He neither gives the success of guidance to a person, nor does He deny a person success. Those who undertake the jihad upon God's way, war with their difficulties, and show strength and firmness of purpose, have been promised guidance, and thus is justice. But those who create oppression and suppression, and those who take steps towards extravagance, doubt, injustice, and causing temptation in hearts, God takes away their possibility of guidance. Their hearts, as a result of these deeds, are darkened, and they will not be able to succeed in reaching the station of well-being. This is how the Creator leaves the results of our deeds in our own hands, and this is justice. Number 3. Knowledge of the eternal is a cause to arise. The last point which we feel should be mentioned here is the discussion of predestination and free will is the excuse used by some fatalists as knowledge of the eternal of God. They say, does God know that so and so at such and such an hour on such and such a day will kill someone or will drink an alcoholic beverage? If we say he does not know, we have denied God's knowledge, and if we say yes, that person must do this, otherwise God's knowledge will be imperfect. Thus, in order to perceive God's knowledge, a person is obliged to sin and obey God. But the fact is, this excuse was fabricated in order to cover over the sins they wanted to commit, but they have forgotten the fact that we say that God knew from eternity whether we would be inclined towards free will and choice and will obey or sin. That is, our will or choice was also part of God's knowledge. Thus, if we are obliged to sin, God's knowledge will become ignorant. Pay careful attention here. Allow us to put forth some questions on this point to clarify them. Assume that a teacher knows that a lazy student will fail at the end of the year, and the teacher is 100% sure of this fact because of years of experience as a teacher. When the student fails, can the student take the teacher to task and say, "Your knowledge and what you foresaw caused me to fail"? Or let us assume that he is a sinless and a pure person, and he knew of a murder which would take place on such and such a day and interferes to prevent it. Does the knowledge of this pure person take away the responsibility of the criminal, obliging the criminal to commit the crime? Or assume that a new machine has been invented that can predict the occurrence of an event several hours before it happens, and it can say that so and so at such and such an hour in such and such a place will commit such and such an act. Does this oblige that person to do this? In summary, God's knowledge never obliges anyone to do anything. Think and answer. Number 1. How many kinds of guidance are there? Describe them. Number 2. Recite the verses of the Quran which describe God's guidance and leading astray. Number 3. What is the interpretation of God's guidance and leading astray? Number 4. What is meant by God's eternal knowledge? Number 5. Does this knowledge withdraw our duty and responsibility? Give an example. Lesson 20. God's justice and the issue of eternity. We know that the Holy Quran directly speaks of the eternal punishment to be given to the kuffar. That is, it speaks about eternity. God has promised the hypocrites, men and women, and the kafirs, the fire of hell therein shall they dwell. Sufficient is it for them is the curse of God and an enduring punishment. Just as in the verse following that, the Holy Quran promises the believing men and the believing women gardens in paradise forever. God has promised to believers, men and women, gardens under which rivers flow to dwell therein, and beautiful mansions and gardens of everlasting bliss. But the greatest bliss is the good pleasure of God, that is the supreme felicity. This question then arises, and that is, how can one accept that in one's lifetime of 80 or 100 years one commits evil deeds and then for eternity, millions of years is punished? Of course, this is not important as to rewards because the ocean of God's mercy is very great, and however much greater is the reward, it shows greater virtue and mercy. But as to evil deeds, they are punished for eternity because of limited sins. How can this be reconciled with God's justice? Should a balance not exist between punishment and reward? Answer. In order to reach a final solution to this discussion, several points need to be noted. A. Punishments on the day of resurrection do not resemble punishments in this world. For instance, a person is found guilty of aggression and plunder and he spends some time in prison, whereas the punishment at the judgment takes the form of efforts of one's deeds and the particularities of a person's acts. In clearer terms, the difficulties which one bears in the other world are the direct results of his deeds. The Holy Quran explains this very clearly, where it says, "Then on that day not a soul will be wronged in the least, and you shall but be repaid the meeds of your past deeds." With one simple example, we can visualize this truth, that a person who goes after narcotics and alcoholic drinks, and no matter how much one explains that these things will ruin him and sicken his heart and destroy his nerves, and he does not listen, he spends several weeks or months drowned in these killing pleasures and gradually develops ulcers, heart disease, nerve disease, and then he spends tens of years until the end of his life suffering because of this, and he groans night and day. Can one object here, why does a person who only sinned for several weeks or months have to suffer for tens of years? It is readily stated in response that this is a result of his own actions. Even if he were to live longer than the Prophet Noah, peace be upon him, and were to live for tens of thousands of years, and we were to continuously see him in pain and anguish, we would say that this is something he brought upon himself with his deeds. Punishment on the day of judgment is like this. Thus, no one can object to the justice of the situation. B. This is wrong that some people assume that the time limit of the punishment must be the same extent as the sin, because the relation between a sin and punishment is not a temporal one. It depends upon the result and quality of the sin. For instance, it is possible that a person in 1 second kills an innocent person, and according to the laws of some countries, he is given life imprisonment. Here, we see that the time of the sin was one quickly passing second, whereas the punishment is for tens of years. No one considers this to be oppressive. Why? Because the question here is not one of days or weeks or months or years. It depends upon the quality of the sin and its result. C. Eternity in hell and eternal punishment only belongs to those people who have closed all doors to salvation for themselves, and they have thrown themselves in corruption, kufr, and hypocrisy, so that the darkness of sin takes over their entire being, and as a result, that person takes on the color of sin and kufr. The Holy Quran says, "Nay, those who seek gain in evil and are girt round by their sins, they are companions of the fire, therein shall they abide forever." These kinds of individuals have completely cut off their connection with God and have closed all doors to their salvation and well-being. These kinds of individuals are like birds which purposefully break their own wings, pull out their feathers, and are obliged to walk forever upon the earth, and are deprived of flying through the skies. Noticing the 3 points given above clarifies the issue that eternal punishment, which belongs to a particular group of hypocrites or kuffar, does not oppose the principle of justice. This is the ominous result of their deeds themselves. The divine prophets had previously told them that their deeds would have these results. It is clear that if individuals are ignorant and the invitation of the prophets are not known to them, and if they commit evil deeds out of ignorance, they will not receive such a difficult punishment. It is also necessary to point out that verses of the Holy Quran and Islamic traditions are used because the ocean of divine mercy is so great and extensive that a large group of transgressors are included. Some by means of intercession, some by means of forgiveness, and some because of small good deeds which they performed. God, in His greatness, gives great reward for those small good deeds. And another group, after they have been punished for a time in hell, have been purified, they will return because of divine mercy. The only group remaining is the one which has enmity towards the truth, and commit oppression, corruption, and hypocrisy, so that their whole being is covered in oppression, kufr, and faithlessness. Think and answer. Number 1. How is it that some people think that eternity does not conform to divine justice? Number 2. Are the punishments in the other world similar to the punishments in this world? If not, what are they like? Number 3. Does justice demand that there be a balance between the time of a sin and its punishment? Number 4. Who will receive eternal punishment? Number 5. Who will receive divine forgiveness?